Oh, goody.
All right, what's going on, everybody? Zombies here again, and today we're back with another Marvel Snap video. So today we're going over some best decks for the new Season Pass card dropping this afternoon, Miss Marvel. Miss Marvel is a 4-cost 5-power that reads ongoing. Adjacent locations where your cards have unique costs get +5 power. So interesting effect, kind of like a souped up Mr. Fantastic, giving you essentially Dr. Doom amounts of power across the board, but does have a more strict restriction to enable its effect to work. Overall, I think this card is kind of a middle of the pack card. I don't think it's amazing. I don't think it's awful. Overall, I think this is an alright effect. I don't think it's super impressive or flashy, but it is a lot of power for a low amount of cost. So if you can build your deck in a way where it's not really hindered by meeting that restriction, seems alright. I do worry that, like many other cards in the past, a lot of people are just going to be essentially either playing this or just playing the counter cards like Rogue or Enchantress or what have you. But usually that dies down after a day or two. So interested to see what this card does to the game. This is a Season Pass card, so no Spotlight caches for this one just yet. You can get it in the Pass, and if you're spending any money on Snap, Pass is generally regarded as probably the best way to do so at a low cost. We do have the Spotlight cache listed here though for those who are interested in that this week. We have Alioth making its return, as well as the newly buffed Negasonic, and everyone's favorite card to open out of a Spotlight cache, Null, returning for his, third appearance, I think? So yeah, I don't expect this card to be a super big impact to the overall metagame, but I do think there are some fun ways to build around it. This is very much a card that is a build around. It's not going to just auto slot into a lot of decks, but I think the decks that are willing to build around it without actually having to change their deck a whole lot from what it was already doing definitely get a lot of benefit out of this effect, and there are two archetypes in particular that I think get a big boost from her. So yeah, I think the pass is worth picking up. Generally is. If you're someone who's a bit more selective on the pass though, if you're not buying the pass every month, I don't think this is one that's going to harm you badly if you skip it, unlike let's say Loki or Elsa in the past, where those cards were very, very important to the overall metagame that was going on at the time. I don't think Miss Marvel is going to be that same level of importance, so if you do want to hold out for other season passes that interest you more, probably a fine approach. But if you just want a new card to mess around with and get all the other extra goodies that come with the pass, like the variants, gold, credits, all that stuff, pretty much always the best thing to buy in Snap for the low cost. Anyways, that's enough about the card and the pass. Let's talk about the decks. So there are two main archetypes that I think are going to be benefiting from Miss Marvel. First of which is going to be ongoing focused and lockdown focused decks, putting them in kind of the same category here, as I find a lot of the lockdown decks are ongoing. Not all of them are, but I think ongoing just naturally fits in very well with the lockdown playstyle. But basically, ongoing / lockdown and then Darkhawk are the two ways I see this card being played pretty effectively. Now, also worth noting, Mobius is going to be reverted to a 3/3 with his on-reveal original effect. So that could also be an additional inclusion that you could consider in some of these ongoing decks. However, that won't be live until the OTA happens on Thursday. For this deck, we are just trying to run a critical mass of ongoing cards. We're trying to stack that middle lane with our Miss Marvel in combination with another beneficial effect, like an Iron Man, Mr. Fantastic, or even just something like Cosmo to offer some protection, and then slam down Onslaught in that middle lane, get the Miss Marvel boost to the other lanes while also putting out a ton of power down middle. Now, early game is pretty important in this deck, as it was clarified that Miss Marvel will only give a boost to lanes that have at least one card in them. So we have a few different 1 and 2 drops here. Nebula, one of the better 1 drops in the game. Snowguard, I really like the flexibility of, as interacting with locations is always good. It gives us a cheap 1 drop we can play on one of our side lanes to activate Miss Marvel, and sometimes getting those 3 drops can help fill out our curve if we don't happen to find our other 3 drops in Mr. Fantastic and Cosmo. Invisible Woman acts as a pseudo Cosmo or just a big cube gainer, where if the opponent doesn't really know what we're playing, they might be more likely to stay in the game, or maybe you can bluff snap them out. But she's mainly here to either not reveal our strategy when we're going down mid with Miss Marvel into Onslaught shenanigans, or just as another way to make it so we can't get our powerful ongoing effects ruined by Enchantress or Rogue. We're also running Iron Lad in here just as another way to copy our powerful ongoing effects like Miss Marvel, Iron Man, and Onslaught. And Chavez gives us an alternative line on turn 6, but she's mainly here to help guarantee we get those important ongoing cards, as well as our early game in the early turns of the game when we need them most. Now, another direction you can go is Lockdown. So Lockdown is very much trying to just close out lanes, make it so your opponent can't play cards in them. And then Miss Marvel obviously has good synergy with Lockdown because she's giving power to lanes that otherwise cannot get it. So for this one, we are running the main Lockdown pieces of Storm and Professor X, as well as Iron Lad as a way to copy them. Really just trying to close one lane with Storm or X. Sometimes we can close 2 lanes, which might also be beneficial given Miss Marvel's effect. But we have Nebula as kind of the premier 1-drop for shutting down lanes. Medusa obviously having synergy with Miss Marvel if we need to get a bit more points in the Marvel lane. Or it opens up the play line of going Medusa into Storm into Miss Marvel. Hopefully winning that middle lane while also distributing power on the left and right lanes seems pretty good. Jeff has that nice flexibility and can help guarantee we get that win on a lane with Professor X if it's not enough initially when we play the card. Fantastic contributes to spreading our power around, naturally good with the Lockdown style. We're running Drax in the 4-drop slot. This could also be Jessica Jones. I find it's a personal preference kind of thing, but I think Drax is generally a little bit better because you don't have a restriction. Sure, you can miss on the effect, but if you miss on the effect using Drax in a Storm lane, I think it's often times that your opponent is kind of just giving up on the Storm lane. You probably won't need that extra 2 power, and it has the added benefit of being a much better play on turn 6 if you have to resort to that, and a better Iron Lad hit. Professor X, obviously mainstay of Lockdown, good with Miss Marvel given her boost. Vision gives us some added flexibility in terms of where we're distributing our power, and can just help us win back a Storm lane we may have otherwise lost. And Alioth, the king of Lockdown, you have another lane 1, and especially if you have priority, you can just slam this card and usually close out the game. We're using Psylocke in this deck, who not only serves as a way to ramp out powerful 5-drops ahead of curve like Professor X and Vision, but it also enables us to potentially get down our Miss Marvel or Iron Lad a turn early if it helps smooth out our curve. And then another take on the Lockdown list is one where you are going to be running a bit higher of a curve, but you have a little bit more impact in terms of what you can do with locations. This one's running Legion, who's really great at scamming certain locations, which naturally synergizes well with the Lockdown archetype. So a lot of overlap here from the other list. We are running Lizard over Medusa. I think Lizard is good for the added flexibility. Medusa's probably not that bad, but I do think Lizard is more beneficial in this particular list because we're not always going to be able to play it middle. Sometimes we'll want it in the other lanes that we're going to hopefully be shutting off. And I think he just shines a little bit more there since he's not as restricted to one lane. Jeff and Nebula, standard inclusions in Lockdown. Mr. Fantastic still does really good things when we're trying to evenly spread out the power. So a lot of overlap here. We are running Doom, which I think obviously is a good Lad hit. Decent synergy with Miss Marvel, and it gives us another way to go wide on that final turn to help guarantee 2 out of those 3 lanes. And of course, Chavez is here to help guarantee us that consistency in getting those early game cards when we need them. I think this one's definitely a little bit more high rolly or reliant on locations with Legion, but nonetheless, I think it's a fun way to play Lockdown if that's an archetype you're into. And the other archetype that I think is going to be beneficial from this is Darkhawk. So obviously, Miss Marvel is a 4-cost card, so the Zabu Darkhawk shell seems like a natural inclusion. Obviously, we do run a decent amount of 4s. A lot of times we just aren't playing those 4s in the same location. I think we can pretty easily get her effect to go off, which seems pretty beneficial. It also lets us run a Spectrum version of the deck, since we're kind of focused on a lot of ongoing cards here. And Spectrum is now a bit more reasonable of a threat in her own right, having been buffed to 7 power. So we have the standard Darkhawk package here with Korg, Rockslide, Darkhawk, and Zabu. Lad is a great high roll in a Darkhawk deck. We have really good hits here. Darkhawk, Miss Marvel herself, Iron Man X, or even Spectrum all seem rather good. Cosmo acting as a piece of protection both for our Darkhawk and our Miss Marvel, as well as just any of our generally good ongoing effects. Jeff for the added flexibility, being able to move around. Pretty straightforward, but I do think it is also probably pretty effective. So if you want a new take on Darkhawk that plays a bit differently than traditional versions, Miss Marvel's probably a cool way to do it. However, if you're a fan of a bit more traditional Darkhawk decks, I think that's a pretty viable option too. So we're once again bringing out Invisible Woman here as a way to kind of hide what we're doing with Miss Marvel, potentially hide our Darkhawk so the opponent can't Shang it early. We could hide our Shadow King and Shang-Chi, though do be a little careful if you're hiding that Shadow King in a lane other than the Miss Marvel one, as obviously you'd have 2/2 there and her effect wouldn't trigger, but totally fine if you're doing it in the middle. This one's definitely more reliant on tech to swing a lane and then close out the other one with our Darkhawk or going wide with Miss Marvel and Doctor Doom. Shang has definitely seen a bit of a resurgence recently after the card disappeared for a while during the Loki and Elsa seasons, and I think the overall game plan of this deck is pretty solid in being able to go both tall or wide and interact with a lot of the threats going around in the game right now between Shang and Shadow King. There we have it. That is going to wrap it up for our day one Miss Marvel best decks. As always, if you want to try out any of the decks shown in the video, links in the description to the decks where you can import them. So let me know what you think in the comments below about this card. Are you picking it up? Are you excited for it? Is there a build you're thinking of trying that you didn't see on here? I'd love to hear it. That's going to wrap it up for this video. I'll probably be streaming with this card a little bit later today. So if you want to see some gameplay with it, feel free to check out the stream, link in the description below. That's going to wrap it up for this one. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, remember to like and subscribe, and I'll catch you in the next one. Peace.